The loss by Columbus of his compass marked the inaugural configuration of the modern world. The notion of a flat world was finally squashed. The entire Western Hemisphere, despite the existence of its ancient tribal civilization, was immediately designated by those who had set sail for India as the New World. The existing indigenous populations became the instant victims of genocide, their lands conquered and their sacred traditions destroyed. Located at the crossroads of the North and South, at the junctions of East and West, Europeans discovered the Azio-Caribbean Sea, which became for centuries the naval battleground for colonial piracy and supremacy. Between 1670s and the early 1800s, 3 Caribbean islands were the richest colonies in the world: Barbados, Saint Domingue, and Jamaica. Cuba was the wealthiest by the mid-19th century. The European invasion inaugurated within the Caribbean a series of highly forced population movements consisting of European plantation settlers, African enslaved labor, indentured subjects from parts of the Indian subcontinent and portions of China. As societies which were racially complex, but with a distinctive black majority, our cornucopia of linguistic influences and cultural origins created a rich Caribbean melting pot. As the novelist George Lamming observed, the Caribbean, and therefore Caribbean thought, was animated by the oxygen of history. The Caribbean intellectual tradition is one which is composed of formal conventional thought infused by ancestral practices. Within Caribbean civilization, practices like voodoo, Maoism, and Santeria are not just Afro-Caribbean religious practices. They are also systems of thought and elaborate forms of cosmology. When they first appeared in Caribbean life, they created alternatives to colonial forms of knowledge. In the immediate post-slavery period, the missionaries complained about what they called the Africanization of Christianity. This emergence of Maoism marked what Rex Nettleford described as the battle for space. Later on, thinkers like Sylvia Wynter, following the Haitian intellectual Jean Price Mars, argued for a form of indigenization in the Caribbean, pummeling the African population to make this space by populating the landscape with their gods and spirits. These leading practitioners of Afro-Caribbean religious figures, many of whom have also been leading artists and musicians, deserve due recognition in our deliberations today. Rastafari is a seminal example of this, now having widespread outreach in the Americas and even within Africa. Caribbean thought has been of world significance in the areas of political thought, economic theory, historiography, literature, music, art, culture, and innovation. It was the Haitian Revolution which abolished racial slavery and established the first Black republic to win freedom and liberty within the Western Hemisphere for every human being who traversed its sovereign soil. Its 1805 Constitution also abolished the biological foundation of anti-black racism in the Western world by proclaiming that all Haitians were black, including those Poles and Germans who had deserted the Napoleonic army. They had joined in 1803 the Revolutionary Indigenous Army, which was so named as a tribute to the native population decimated by Spanish and French colonialism. The constitutional claim of political blackness revised the framing of anti-black racism as biology. That created the concept and the philosophy of negritude, formulated by Aimé Césaire of Martinique and Leopold Senghor. This became one of the leading philosophical currents in the 1940s during the search to restore the cultural identity of black Africans everywhere. Césaire's seminal poem, Return to My Native Land, is a glittering marker in the 20th century annals of world poetry. In the period of decolonization, Frantz Fanon from Martinique emerged as a central figure of the African Revolution and radical anti-colonial political thought during the late 20th century. It was C.L.R. James who formulated the idea of the mass democratic political party for the Caribbean. At the global level, James's work reformulated radical political thought, dismantling the prevalent idea of the then Soviet Union as a genuine socialist society and expounding the theoretical formulation of state capitalism as a new political concept. The political activism and writings of George Padmore made him a pioneer of African independence, and his formulation of Pan-Africanism remains a cornerstone for black politics in modern times. Of course, there's Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who built the UNIA, the single largest black organization in the world of the early 20th century. His promotion of black nationalism, up you mighty race, his advocacy for the liberation and unity of Africa have resonated throughout the years on the battlefields and the assembly halls where decisions are made on our destiny as equal members of the whole human race. His oratory and writings are a source of constant inspiration in the struggles for justice everywhere. We should never abandon the campaign until he obtains the presidential exoneration for the travesty of justice he suffered in a trial riddled with prosecutorial misconduct. The work of Anton de Kom from Suriname was critical to the defeat of fascism in the Netherlands. As the United Kingdom is awakening to recognize at long last the tremendous work of rebuilding Britain by the Windrush generation, we should not forget Claudia Jones of Trinidad. She was a trailblazing black radical feminist and leading advocate of black women's struggles in the USA. When she was deported from America, she emerged in London as a leading anti-racist campaigner and a founder of the Notting Hill Carnival. Another great daughter of the Caribbean, Mary Seacole, also deserves special mention in our discourse. Even as we intensify the compelling demand for reparations, it is appropriate to reflect on the brilliant work of scholarship which exposed the compelling reason why slavery was in fact abandoned. Capitalism and Slavery reveals the irrefutable analysis of another great intellectual mind, Dr. Eric Williams, later to become a founding father of the Caribbean community that will attain its 60th anniversary at Chaguaramas in July. We are obliged to mention here the historical work of Dr. Walter Rodney, particularly for his illuminating narrative on how Europe underdeveloped Africa, which will forever be a seminal work in African history and political learning. Dare we forget Sir Arthur Lewis, the first Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, 1979 Nobel Prize winner in economic science for his pioneering research into economic development with an emphasis on developing countries. He delved into the transfer of labor from a traditional to a modern capitalist society where there is an excessive supply of labor. Transforming surplus labor from subsistence levels, from traditional agriculture to a modern industrial sector. Not only has the Caribbean produced the Nobel laureates, Derek Walcott and Vivian Naipaul, but there have been other novelists who have also transformed global literature. George Lamming, Maurice Condé, Edwidge Danticat, Samuel Selvon, Camus Brathwaite, Wilson Harris, Jacques Romain, Patrick Chamoisseau, whose novel Texaco rewrote aspects of French. Lamming utilized his formidable literary skills as a political activist to create a new ethos around what it meant to be a Caribbean person. In doing this, his public intellectual work challenged the ways in which conventional criticism seized the novel. The University of the West Indies is proud to claim as one of its own Derek Walcott, who, in breaking the traditional barriers of race and language, was not afraid to delve into our past colonial history. Then there is the incomparable Nicholas Guillen, the Cuban architect of Poesía Negra. The work of Cuban novelist Alejo Carpentier has created the literary genre of the marvelous in his remarkable novel on the Haitian Revolution, The Kingdom of This World. Antenor Firmin is the author of the most critical book on Black equality that was written in the late 19th century, The Equality of the Human Race, in 1885. That is the first sustained philosophical and anthropological refutation of scientific racism. The work of Jean Price Mars on the cultural anthropology of Blackness and Africanisms in Haiti opened the door for the development for scores of subsequent theories later on about African retentions in the region. His 1928 book, So Spoke Uncle, is a path-breaking one in exploring the culture of the Caribbean. Caribbean art has created new art forms and categories. There is no world history of art without the names of Hector Hippolyte from Haiti and Wilfredo Lam from Cuba. The latter's work redefined black compositional and his 1953 masterpiece, The Jungle. He proclaimed that for him, art was about decolonization. Edouard Guisson from Martinique and Jacques Alexis from Haiti created the special category for Caribbean art, which came to be known as the marvelous real. As we duly applaud the impressive contribution of the illustrious Caribbean progeny in so many spheres of human endeavor, we need to be mindful and fittingly recognize how much of that intellectual ferment has come from the people themselves, nowhere more so than in the areas of art, design, music, and forms of cultural celebration. It is no wonder that these innovative talents resulted in the only new musical instrument of the 20th century, the steel pan from the land of the hummingbird. The players can, with skills equal to the greatest symphony orchestras, treat us to the music of Beethoven, the Beatles, Bob Marley, or Irving Berlin, to portray the messages of social protest from Harry Belafonte to Peter Tosh. There have been inarguably outstanding legends in the creative fields. Lord Kitchener, Mighty Sparrow, Calypso Rose, David Rudder, Peter Minshall. But it is we the people who make the festivals. Junkuno, Masquerade, Mass, Carnival. The enslaved who created music, dance, and performances to mock their masters and release their spirits in celebrations that blend all our ethnic origins, exposure, and rhythmic skills. Then there are the various genres of music: rumba, zouk from Guadeloupe, mento, reggae and ska from Jamaica, merengue in the Dominican Republic, mambo and cha-cha-cha from Cuba are musical forms which have been dominant on the market charts. King Stitt and U Roy ruled the day in Jamaica before any Jamaican star converted their disc jockey style into what is now known as hip-hop. Our geographic location and fragile ecosystems render the Caribbean vulnerable to natural disasters of every kind. For us, global warming is no idle threat, and so our brightest minds have engaged in the scientific studies pertaining to climate change. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the University of the West Indies, attention is drawn to the award of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize, shared with Al Gore, to Professor Emeritus Anthony Chen of the Physics Department of the University of the West Indies as a member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Fourth Assessment. We must remain on the cutting edge of science for our survival and enter the race to make our own technological revolution. And so, my friends, the Caribbean intellectual tradition is a profound one and it has made extensive contributions to the questions about being human and what that means for the world. Let us recognize the complexity of this tradition and also be attentive to its popular forms as we seek to transcend commercial and generational boundaries. Out of this diversity and the exuberant intellectual legacy it has already spawned, we will create our own destiny and mold a great Caribbean civilization to reflect our rich tapestry and thereby release our full capacity for excellence and innovation now and in the ages ahead. Thank you.